What if the laughter of children on Halloween was not joy, but a lure? In 1875, in the shadowed village of Hollow Pines, Vermont, twin siblings Elias and Elowen wandered into the October woods on All Hallows' Eve. Bright-eyed, their masks painted with ash, their hands sticky with pumpkin pulp. When the bonfire dimmed and the chanting ceased, they returned before dawn, their youth stolen, their bodies wasted, their voices cracked with age. In one night, they had aged 50 years. Their curse became the marrow of the town, a legend of ruin that lingers still. If you are drawn to the dark, subscribe. Every tale you hear here is a lantern lit in forbidden ground, a flame that feeds on silence and shadow. Stay, and Hollow Pines will remember your name. The year was 1875, and the air in Vermont's northern hills carried the ache of starvation. Hollow Pines, a village named for the forest that seemed always to bow in despair, crouched beneath skies the color of iron. Its houses sagged with mildew, roofs leaking into rooms where children coughed themselves to sleep. The frost had come. Early that year, sheathing fields in a brittle white crust, and what crops remained had turned bitter in their husks. The smell of rot clung to every barn, a perfume of mildew and despair that clung to the villagers' clothes like another layer of skin. It was here, in a shack half swallowed by brambles, that the twins Elias and Elowen lived with their mother. 9 years old, mirror images of one another save for the faint scar upon Elowen's temple, they were children of uncanny silence. They did not play as others did. They whispered to each other in half-sentences, finishing each other's thoughts, with eerie precision. Some swore they spoke in tongues not taught by man. Their mother, pale and trembling with the exhaustion of hunger, kept candles burning at all hours, though she could not afford the wax. She claimed the shadows pressed too near her children, that when she looked into the soot-streaked mirror, above her bed, she sometimes saw them aged, lined faces, sunken eyes, lips trembling with the rattle of the dying. The villagers feared them. The bloodline carried weight, for their grandmother had once been caught scattering herbs on graves and chanting while the moon was high. She was hanged in the square, and still her body twitched for an hour after death, as though something clung to her that refused to leave. Children of her line were marked, the priest had said, but no one expected the mark to bloom so fiercely. As October waned, Hollow Pines prepared for the night of masks and fire. It was no festival. The villagers carved jack-o'-lanterns with hands that trembled, gouging grotesque faces into pumpkins and leaving them to rot upon doorsteps. They lit them, not in joy, but in desperation, each candle a ward against spirits, thought to prowl the thinning veil between life and death. Scarecrows were reinforced in the fields, straw bodies stiffened with bones of animals, their heads painted with tar to mimic human faces. And though the villagers tried to treat the rituals as tradition, a sickness gnawed at their hearts, that this Halloween something would breach their fragile defenses. The twins felt it most of all. Elias claimed to hear his name carried on the wind whispered by a voice that slithered through the pines. Elowen dreamt of scarecrows leaning over her bed, their straw fingers brushing her hair. Their mother woke one night to find them carving strange symbols into the floorboards with a shard of bone, their eyes vacant, their hands moving as if guided. When she screamed and struck the bone away, Elias only smiled, his teeth sharp in the candlelight, and whispered, "It told us to finish." On the morning of October 31st, a scream tore through Hollow Pines. Their mother had seen the mirror again, her children reflected as withered elders, wrinkled faces staring back, mouthing words she could not hear. The neighbors rushed to her. Shaq found her trembling in the doorway, the twins standing silent behind her, their eyes far too old for 9 years. And as the villagers drew back in fear, the church bell cracked the air with a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself, as though the ground had begun to scream. The first omen had come. The sky of October 31st was swollen with storm clouds. bruised purple and gray, as though the heavens themselves recoiled from hollow pines. The villagers gathered near the clearing where the great bonfire was stacked, a tower of timber and brush that creaked in the wind, its edges licked by the first tentative sparks of kindling. The tradition was older than memory. Light the fire to confuse the spirits, wear the mask to conceal the soul. It was said that without disguise, the dead would claim the living, mistaking warm flesh for a place to dwell. Men pulled hoods stitched from burlap over their heads, painted with soot and ash to resemble hollow-eyed ghouls. Women wrapped bark around their faces, carving grotesque grins that mocked the grave. Even the priest, stiff and pale, wore a mask of bone fragments strung together with twine, though his eyes betrayed terror more than faith. The air was taut, heavy with smoke and anticipation, the villagers' breaths rising in unison like the steam of cattle driven toward slaughter. The children, too, were commanded to mask themselves. Most wore crude creations, straw crowns, cloth painted with coal, but Elias and Elowen brought forth their own. They had carved them in secret, their mother discovering them only when it was too late. Elias wore a face with one eye gouged hollow, the other widened in a scream of pain. Elowen's mask stretched with teeth too long, carved to grin across the whole of her cheeks like a death's head. The villagers recoiled when the twins appeared, for the masks were too lifelike, too anguished, as though modeled on faces truly suffering. Their mother begged them to discard them, but the twins shook their heads. "The fire asked for these," Elowen whispered, her voice small yet steady, "and it must be answered." When the bonfire roared to life, flames clawing skyward with fingers of blue and orange, the villagers began their circle. They chanted words passed down from their ancestors, half prayer, half incantation, meant to ward away the restless souls. The masks bobbed in the firelight, grotesque faces jerking in rhythm to the drumbeat of feet on soil. The air grew hotter, smoke twisting in ribbons, sparks drifting like ghostly motes. But when Elias and Elowen stepped into the circle, something shifted. The fire flared unnaturally, tongues of blue flame licking at the sky. The villagers faltered mid-step, voices breaking in their throats. The twins' masks glowed red, as if heated from within, and a faint hissing rose, skin blistering beneath, though the children made no sound of pain. Their small hands rose together, and when they spoke, it was not in English. The words were sharp, guttural, older than any tongue known in hollow pines. The villagers stumbled back, clutching at their masks, fearful that the spirits they sought to repel had already arrived. Mothers shielded their children, men made the sign of the cross, and the priest dropped to his knees, muttering frantic prayers. Then the earth shuddered. A crack split the soil at the edge of the fire pit, yawning wide as if the ground itself had taken breath. The circle stopped. The chanting died. Only the wind spoke now, whistling through the fields, carrying with it the sound of many voices, low, rasping, countless in number. The villagers turned toward the cornfields, and there, beneath the harvest moon, the scarecrows began to lean, their heads twisting to watch. The dance had awakened something that was waiting, and it was hungry. The cornfields of hollow pines had always carried an unease. Even before the famine, even before the frost, the rows grew crooked, twisting as though bending away from something buried beneath the soil. And yet, on this Halloween night, the priest, his mask dangling loose from his trembling hands, pushed forward. "Be gone from this circle," he cried, his voice cracking, though his faith was brittle as dry leaves. He raised the crucifix, but the shadow cast at his feet refused to follow. It clung to the earth, black and writhing, twisting like a serpent, pulling against him. The villagers watched in horror as his shadow detached, wriggling across the scorched soil, its mouth opening, though no sound came. The scarecrows leaned closer. One by one, their straw heads turned, faces painted in tar and soot, tilting with the same slow, deliberate movement. The sound of straw crackling echoed like brittle bones breaking. A mother dropped to her knees, clutching her child to her chest, weeping into her mask. Men gripped their torches tighter, but none dared approach the circle. And then Elias and Elowen lifted their faces to the crimson moon. Their mouths opened, and what poured forth was no human voice, but a multitude. Hundreds, thousands of voices shrieking together, a chorus of the dead pulled from shallow graves. The sound clawed through the villagers' ears, rattling their teeth, making their bones hum with agony. The fire behind them sputtered, shrinking low. The night pressed in, and with the last flicker of flame, the first scarecrow took a step forward. The bell tower of hollow pines had not rung in years. Its rope was frayed, its metal rusted, the clapper seized with disuse. Yet at the stroke of midnight on that Halloween night, the bell shuddered into motion. The first toll resounded through the forest, a sound deeper than iron, more like bone, breaking under water. It rang not 12 times as the hour demanded, but 13, each strike echoing with a pain that settled into marrow. Villagers clutched their ribs, many collapsing to their knees as if the sound alone had splintered them from within. In the cornfield, the circle glowed faintly red, as though the earth itself had been branded. Elias and Elowen staggered free. Of it, their hands still joined, their masks half melted into their skin. They looked not at the villagers, not at their mother screaming their names, but toward the forest, where the trees swayed in a wind no one else could feel. They walked with jerking movements, as if driven forward by invisible chains. Behind them, the scarecrows stirred. The first step was a shuffle, straw snapping like tendons. Then came another, and another. Dozens of them, uprooting themselves. From their posts, dragging stiff legs through the earth, their hay-stuffed fingers clawing at the ground as though they sought to anchor themselves against some unseen pull. Faces painted with tar glistened in the moonlight, eyeless yet watching. The villagers screamed and scattered, but still none dared pursue the twins into the woods. The bonfire, once a tower of flame, withered to embers, leaving the clearing drenched in smoke and shadow. Mothers clutched their children, men brandished torches that sputtered uselessly, while the priest lay prostrate on the ground, his crucifix fallen, his lips moving in prayers too broken to save him. The forest swallowed the twins. Their figures, small and stiff, vanished between the skeletal pines. The villagers strained their ears, desperate for sound, and they heard it, chanting. Not the childish whispers of Elias and Elowen, but a gathering, a crowd. Many voices, too many to count, muttering in harmony. It rose and fell like waves against rock, the language sharp, cutting, incomprehensible, yet heavy with meaning. Some villagers clamped their hands over their ears, but still the words seeped in, burning like fever. Hours passed. The scarecrows had frozen at the edge of the clearing, sentinels that no one dared approach. The villagers waited by the dying embers, eyes locked on the tree line. None slept, none spoke. Only the mothers wept quietly, the sound muffled into their masks. And then, just as the horizon began to pale, the chanting ceased. A silence, vast and absolute, blanketed hollow pines. The villagers dared to hope that it was over. From the trees, 2 figures emerged. The twins staggered into the clearing, no longer children. Their backs bent with age, their hair shock white, their skin shriveled and loose as parchment. Their eyes were cloudy, ringed with red, and their mouths trembled with toothless moans. They screamed for their mother, but the sound was not of children. It was the rasp of the dying, the rattle of throats filled with dust. The villagers froze, horror rooting them to the spot. Before their eyes, youth had been devoured. Something had been taken, something would never return. And as the twins collapsed at the foot of the chapel, the scarecrows turned their heads as one, staring into the village with hunger. Dawn did not bring mercy. It crawled into hollow pines like a thief, gray and cold, dragging with it a silence too heavy for mourning. The villagers, hollow-eyed from the night's vigil, gathered in the square to see the twins slumped in their mother's arms. They were alive, but not as children should be. Their hair lay in white tangles, their fingers curled like claws, veins bulging black beneath translucent skin. When they tried to speak, their voices broke into rattles, ancient and cracking like the breath of men on their deathbeds. The priest staggered forward, his crucifix dangling uselessly. He tried to bless them, but his words faltered, and blood spilled down his cheeks from his eyes, as if faith itself had betrayed him. Mothers turned their children away, terrified they would look too long at the husks of Elias and Elowen and be claimed by the same fate. Yet no one dared act. The twins still breathed, and in hollow pines, breathing meant cursed things had not finished their work. By midday, the sickness began. Milk soured in its pails before lips could touch it, bread blackened in ovens, crust turning to stone. Dogs howled until their throats tore raw, then fell silent forever. Infants screamed without pause, lips cracked, eyes bulging with terror at things unseen. The men who tried to work the fields found the corn collapsing into ash at their touch, stalks disintegrating as though decades of rot had devoured them overnight. The scarecrows, those straw guardians raised to repel the dead, were dragged into the square by trembling hands. The villagers piled them together and lit them aflame, hoping to cauterize whatever curse had taken root. Yet as the fire consumed them, the air split with screams, not of straw or wood, but of flesh. The sound was shrill, high-pitched, like the squeal of pigs slaughtered in agony. Mothers clamped their hands over their children's ears, but the screams burrowed deeper, vibrating in their bones. When the fire guttered out, nothing remained but black smoke curling skyward like a signal to something watching. Meanwhile, the twins lingered in their shack. Their mother sat beside them, gaunt and pale, whispering prayers that cracked her voice. But Elias and Elowen whispered back, not to her, not to each other, but to something unseen in the corners of the room. Their mouths moved in strange cadence, voices layering upon one another until it seemed a crowd filled the small space. At night, neighbors swore they heard scratching sounds beneath the shack, as though roots were tunneling through the soil, clawing toward the surface. Then came the first death. A man named Hiram, who had sworn aloud that he would slit the twins' throats before they cursed the village further, was found in the fields at dawn. His body was laid in a circle of bones, his face sewn shut with husks of corn. His chest cavity had been hollowed, ribs pried wide as though something had been planted inside. The villagers fled from the sight, weeping, whispering of retribution. And that night, when the frost thickened and the harvest moon bled pale across the sky, the earth in the cornfield trembled. Something was growing. The seasons passed, but time in hollow pines did not heal. It festered. What had happened to Elias and Elowen on that cursed Halloween seemed to freeze them in ruin. Their bodies, withered and ancient, did not weaken further, nor did death claim them. They moved like brittle puppets, bones creaking with every step, yet their eyes burned faintly, as if lit from within by embers that refused to die. Children would cross the road to avoid them, whispering that their shadows moved even when their bodies stood still. Adults pretended not to see, but in every window shutter, in every hurried prayer, there was terror. Inside the chapel, the priest found his walls defiled. Strange symbols, jagged and curved, were scratched deep into the wooden beams, etched by nails that bled when withdrawn. He swore the twins came each night, dragging their hands across the walls, muttering in voices that grew louder as storms gathered. The words were prophecy, he claimed, though no one dared translate them aloud. "It will come again," he whispered to the villagers, trembling. 50 years hence, when the harvest moon runs red, the debt will be called once more. His warning carried weight, for the scars that had begun appearing on the newborns, of hollow pines bore the same crescent shape as the marks carved into the chapel walls. Families began to dwindle. Some fled, braving the black woods that seemed to twist roads in circles, trapping those who sought to leave. Others vanished quietly, gone by morning with no sign of struggle, as if the village itself had swallowed them whole. The silence grew thicker each year, as though the air itself had been instructed to hold its breath. Hollow pines became a place of muffled sounds, doors creaking, wind whistling through broken rafters, the low hum of insects fattening on rot. And yet, the twins remained. Elias was seen standing in fields at dusk, his figure rigid, head cocked toward the scarecrows as though listening. Elowen wandered near the graves, her withered hands brushing the moss on the stones, murmuring names of those long dead as if reciting a roll call. Some swore their whispers seeped into dreams. Farmers awoke drenched in sweat, remembering voices at their bedside, promising a return, promising that their children's blood would be the harvest yet to come. 1 October. Night. A storm rolled over hollow pines, thunder shaking the ground like the march of giants. Lightning revealed the fields in flashes, and in each jagged illumination, Elias and Elowen stood in a different place, closer, always closer, until the final strike revealed them at the chapel door. They did not knock, they did not speak. But in the morning, the walls bore new words, scratched deeper than before. We do not age. We do not leave. We only wait. The priest hanged himself that winter, his shadow still writhing at his feet, even after his body had gone still. By then, Hollow Pines was a husk of itself, but those who remained lived in dread of one truth, that prophecy ripens like fruit, and fruit falls when its time has come. And the harvest moon was patient. The year turned once more to October, and with it came the long-awaited anniversary. 50 years had passed since Elias and Elowen had stumbled from the cornfield on that blackened Halloween night. 50 years since their faces had shriveled, since their voices had cracked into something too old for children, since hollow pines had been bound in silence. By then, the village was a graveyard disguised as a place of living. Roofs sagged, shutters hung from broken hinges, fields bore nothing but weeds and ash. The streets were empty, save for the wind dragging leaves in slow spirals, and yet some remained. A handful of families, too stubborn or too cursed to leave, gathered as the harvest moon rose swollen and red above the ruins. They lit lanterns and clutched charms of iron, whispering prayers that had long since lost their meaning. They told themselves the prophecy was just madness scratched by desperate hands. But then came the bells. The chapel bells, long rusted and tongueless, rang through the night. Each toll echoed with a sound too sharp, too jagged, as if bone struck against bone. From the cornfield, which had lain barren for decades, stalks now rose in a single night, tall blackened husks that bent toward the village like mourners, and within them walked Elias and Elowen. They were unchanged, their skin gray parchment, their eyes embers. Time had not moved them. Their mother's shack was long rotted, their graves unmarked, yet still they lived, or something in their form lived. They stepped into hollow pines without sound, and every lantern sputtered out, leaving the harvest moon as the only witness. The villagers screamed, fled into homes, barred doors. But walls meant nothing. Elias appeared inside hearths, his head cocked, smoke rising around him as if he had stepped out of the fire itself. Elowen drifted through bedrooms, her fingers tracing the cheeks of children who woke screaming, their hair turning white overnight. The twins spoke no words, but their silence was prophecy enough. They were not here to haunt. They were here to collect. When dawn came, Hollow Pines was silent again. Doors swung open on broken hinges. The chapel roof had collapsed inward and the bell tower lay in splinters. In the fields, villagers were found kneeling in rows, their bodies hollowed like husks, their ribs split open as though harvested. The scarecrows had returned as well, stitched from the villagers' skins, their faces crudely masked in burlap, mouths frozen in silent screams. By winter, Hollow Pines was abandoned. Snow buried the bones of the fields, roofs caved under ice, and no maps dared mark its name again. Travelers claimed to see nothing but ruins. Yet those who drew close on October 31st swore the lanterns still flickered in windows, that the chapel bells still tolled, that children's voices whispered from the corn even when no stalks grew. And sometimes, only sometimes, two withered figures could be seen at the village's edge, watching. Elias and Elowen, the twins who aged 50 years in one Halloween night, waiting for the harvest to ripen again. The ruins still breathe, and the prophecy is not finished.